Scientists spent decades collecting DNA samples from every corner of the planet. Indigenous tribes in the Amazon rainforest, nomadic communities in the Mongolian steppes, isolated island populations in the Pacific, remote villages in the Himalayas. They sequenced millions of genetic markers, built the largest database of human diversity ever created, and ran the analysis that would finally answer the question humanity has been asking for centuries. What they found shattered every assumption we had about race, ancestry, and what it means to be human. The results were so unexpected that some researchers initially thought their equipment was broken. The data showed patterns nobody predicted, connections nobody saw coming, and revelations that made headlines across every major scientific journal in the world. This is what scientists discovered when they compared the DNA of every race on Earth. If you're finding this helpful, hit subscribe. I cover groundbreaking science discoveries like this every week. Now, let's talk about what the data actually revealed. The Human Genome Diversity Project began in the early 1990s with a controversial goal. Its aim was to collect genetic material from indigenous populations before globalization made them disappear. Critics called it unethical. Supporters called it essential. But everyone agreed on one thing. The data would change everything we thought we knew about human variation. The project collected samples from over 1,000 individuals representing 52 populations across 7 geographic regions: Africa, Europe, the Middle East, Central Asia, East Asia, Oceania, and the Americas. Music. Each sample was processed through advanced sequencing technology that could read millions of genetic letters in a single run. The raw data filled entire server farms, petabytes of information waiting to be analyzed. Music. When the first results came back, researchers noticed something immediately. The genetic differences between so-called racial groups were far smaller in music than anyone expected. A person from Beijing and a person from Stockholm might look completely different. Different skin tones, different facial features, different hair textures. But at the DNA level, they shared 99.9% of their genetic code. That remaining 0.1% was where things got music interesting. The analysis revealed that traditional racial categories had almost no basis in genetics. Someone from East Africa might share more genetic similarities with someone from Southern Europe, music, than with someone from West Africa. A Native American population in the Amazon showed unexpected genetic markers found in populations from Papua New Guinea. Music. The neat boxes we created for race didn't exist in the actual genetic music data. But the most shocking discovery was still coming. Researchers found that the greatest genetic diversity on music. Earth exists within Africa, not between continents, not between what we call different races. Within the African continent itself, 2 individuals from neighboring Ethiopian villages could be more genetically different from each other than a random Ethiopian is from a random Norwegian. This made evolutionary sense once you understood human migration history. Modern humans originated in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago. For most of that time, our ancestors stayed on the African continent. Populations mixed, separated, adapted to different environments, and accumulated genetic variations over hundreds of thousands of years. The genetic diversity we see across the entire rest of the world is essentially a subset of the diversity that already existed in African populations before anyone left. When small groups finally migrated out of Africa around 70,000 years ago, they carried only a fraction of the total genetic variation with them. This is called the founder music effect. A small pioneering population cannot possibly represent the full genetic diversity music of their origin population. They are just a sample music, and that sample becomes a foundation for all future populations in new territories. Think of it like this. Imagine you have a bag containing 100 different colored marbles representing African genetic diversity. Now randomly grab 15 marbles and put them in a new bag. That second bag represents the genetic diversity that music left Africa. Even if those 15 marbles split into different groups and spread across Europe and Asia, they will never have more diversity than what is in that original bag of 100. The data confirmed this pattern across every migration route scientists, music, traced. Populations became less genetically diverse the further they moved from Africa. Music. European populations showed less diversity than Middle Eastern populations. East Asian populations showed less diversity than Central Asian populations. Music Native American populations, having traveled the furthest and crossed the Bering Land Bridge as one of the last major migrations, showed the least genetic diversity of all. But diversity wasn't the only surprise in the data. Scientists discovered something even more unexpected when they looked at specific genes. The genes that control visible traits like skin color, hair texture, and facial features make up less than 0.1% of our total genome. These are the traits we use to categorize race. Music, the traits that have driven centuries of discrimination, slavery, and genocide. Music. They represent a tiny, almost negligible fraction of human genetic variation. And those traits evolved incredibly recently in human history. The mutation for light skin in European populations appeared only around 8,000 years ago. Blue eyes emerged even more recently, around 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, from a single ancestor in the region near the Black Sea. East Asian populations developed their distinctive eyelid fold through a separate genetic pathway that has nothing to do with European features. These physical differences we fixate on are music, extremely new evolutionary adaptations to local environments. They're surface-level changes that happen in the blink of an eye compared to our species' total history. Meanwhile, the traits we don't see carry far more genetic complexity: disease resistance, metabolic efficiency, brain development, immune system function. These traits show massive variation within every population group. You can't predict someone's intelligence, athletic ability, or health risks based on what they look like. The genes that matter for those traits are distributed randomly across all human populations. The research found something else that challenged popular beliefs about ancestry. Most people carry genetic ancestry from multiple geographic regions. Someone who identifies as Chinese might have markers from Central Asian populations. Someone who identifies as European might carry Middle Eastern ancestry. Someone from the Caribbean, almost certainly music, has African, European, and indigenous American ancestry mixed together. This genetic mixing isn't a modern phenomenon caused by globalization. It's been happening throughout human history, whenever populations came into music contact. Ancient DNA studies revealed that Europeans today carry genetic material from at least 3 distinct ancestral populations: early European farmers, indigenous hunter-gatherers, music, and Yamnia herders from the Eurasian steppes. None of these groups were pure or isolated. They were already mixtures of earlier populations. The same pattern shows up everywhere scientists looked. East Asians carry ancestry from multiple migration waves. Pacific Islanders descend from at least 2 separate colonization events. Music, mixing Austronesian seafarers with indigenous populations. Even populations we think of as isolated show evidence of gene flow from neighboring groups over thousands of years. The data completely demolished the concept of racial purity. There has never been a pure race. There has never been an isolated population that didn't mix with others given enough time and opportunity. The entire idea that you can draw clean genetic lines between racial groups falls apart under genomic analysis. But if race isn't genetic, why do we see such obvious physical differences between populations? The answer lies in adaptation to local environments. When human populations spread across the globe, they encountered wildly different climates, altitudes, sun exposure levels, and disease pressures. Natural selection favored traits that help survival in those specific conditions. Dark skin protected against intense ultraviolet radiation near the equator. Light skin allowed better vitamin D synthesis in northern latitudes with less sunlight. The epicanthic fold in East Asian populations may have helped protect eyes from cold winds and bright snow glare. These adaptations happen independently in different populations facing similar environmental pressures, a pattern known as convergent evolution. Populations in southern India and Aboriginal Australians both evolved dark skin. Despite being genetically distinct and geographically separated, their skin color evolved convergently because both groups lived in regions with intense sun exposure. The underlying genetic mutations that created dark skin in each population are different. They arrived at the same solution through different genetic pathways. Scientists call this convergent evolution. It is the same reason why dolphins and sharks both have streamlined bodies and fins music, despite one being a mammal and the other being a fish. Similar environmental pressures produce similar solutions even when the underlying biology takes different routes to get there. The environmental adaptation story gets even more interesting when you look at traits that do not fit neat geographic patterns. The ability to digest lactose into adulthood appears in populations that historically raised dairy cattle, including Northern European populations, East African pastoralist groups, music, and some Central Asian communities. But it is absent in most East Asian populations' music, and many African groups despite those regions being geographically close to populations that have the trait. The trait spread based on culture and dairy farming practices, not based on racial categories. High-altitude adaptations show similar patterns. Tibetan populations developed genetic changes that helped them process oxygen more efficiently at extreme elevations. Andean populations in South America evolved different genetic adaptations to achieve the same result. Both groups can survive at altitudes that would cause serious health problems for lowland populations, but they got there through completely different genetic mechanisms because they adapted independently to similar environmental challenges. The genetic data revealed one more crucial finding that researchers initially struggled to explain. Some genetic traits associated with disease susceptibility do cluster in certain geographic populations. Sickle cell anemia appears more frequently in people with West African ancestry. Taysak music. Disease shows higher rates in Ashkenazi Jewish populations. Cystic fibrosis affects European populations more than others. Music. These patterns initially seemed to support the idea that race had genetic meaning, but deeper analysis told a different story. These disease variants did not spread because of race. Music. They spread because they provided survival advantages against specific local threats. Music. The sickle cell mutation protects against malaria, which was endemic in West Africa. Having one copy of the gene music provided resistance to malaria without causing sickle cell disease. Music, natural selection favored that mutation in regions where malaria was a major killer. Regardless of what racial category we would assign to those populations, the same pattern explains other geographic disease clusters. Music. They are not evidence of fundamental genetic differences between races. They are evidence of local evolutionary responses to specific environmental threats. A West African person and a Southern European person from a historically malarious region music might both carry malaria resistance genes despite being classified as different music races. Meanwhile, two people we would categorize as the same race could have completely different disease susceptibility if their ancestors came from regions with different disease music pressures. The genomic data fundamentally challenge the medical practice of using race music as a proxy for genetic risk. A doctor who assumes all patients of a certain race share the same genetic disease risks music is making dangerous assumptions that are not supported by the actual science. Music, individual genetic testing provides far more accurate risk assessment than racial categories ever could. So if race is not genetic, where did the concept come from? The idea of distinct human races emerged in the 1700s and the 1800s when European scientists tried to classify human diversity the same way they classified plants and animals. They created music, hierarchies based on physical appearance and cultural practices. They ranked races in order of supposed superiority. They used these classifications to justify colonialism, slavery, and genocide. Music. These early racial scientists claimed they were following objective scientific observation, but their conclusions were shaped by the prejudices and power structures of their time. They saw differences in technology and social organization between populations and attributed those differences to innate biological inferiority, rather than to historical and environmental circumstances. They turned temporary cultural differences into permanent genetic categories. Modern genetics completely dismantled these racial hierarchies. The traits music that early race scientists used to define and rank races have no correlation with intelligence, morality, civilization level, or any other measure of human worth. The tiny genetic differences that do exist between populations are neutral or adaptive to local conditions. Music. They do not support any ranking of superior versus inferior groups. But perhaps the most important finding from comparing DNA across populations is not what we found. It is what we did not find. Scientists did not find genetic justification for borders. They did not find support for racial nationalism. They did not find evidence that any population is more evolved or more human than any other. What they found instead was a single species with a recent common origin and a shared genetic heritage that makes all of our superficial differences meaningless in the bigger picture. The DNA comparison revealed that the average time since our most recent common ancestor is only about 3,000 years ago. That means if you go back just 120 generations, you will find an ancestor who is related to literally every person alive today. Your family tree and the family tree of someone from the opposite side of the world converge at a point in the very recent past. Going back further to around 7,000 years ago, every person alive today shares the exact same set of ancestors. Everyone living in 7,000 BCE who has any descendants today is an ancestor of all 8 billion people currently alive. That population in ancient Mesopotamia, those farmers in the Yellow River Valley, those hunter-gatherers in southern Africa, if they have descendants who survived to the present day, you are one of those descendants. So is everyone else on Earth. This finding obliterates the idea of pure ancestral lineages. You do not descend from just one ancient population. Music, you descend from all of them. Your ancestry is not a straight line back to a single origin point. Music, it is a web that encompasses the entire human family tree. The only reason you might identify more strongly with one ancestral population over another is because of cultural transmission, not genetics. The genetic data also revealed unexpected connections between populations separated by vast distances. Some Native American populations carry genetic markers found in Siberian populations, confirming migration routes across the Bering Land Bridge. But they also carry traces of ancient gene flow from populations related to Aboriginal Australians and Papua New Guineans. How did genetic material from Oceania end up in the Americas tens of thousands of years ago? Scientists are still piecing together that story, but the data proves that human migration was far more complex than simple linear expansion, music, out of Africa. European populations show similar surprises. Music. Ancient DNA extracted from European skeletons revealed that modern Europeans do not descend from the original hunter-gatherers who first colonized the continent. Those populations were largely replaced by incoming farmers from Anatolia around 9,000 years ago. Then those farming populations were partially replaced by pastoralists from the steppes around Music 5,000 years ago. Modern Europeans are a genetic blend of at least 3 different population waves. Music, none of which knew they were European, because Europe as a cultural identity did music not exist yet. East Asian genetic history shows equally complex patterns. The Han Chinese population, often treated as a monolithic racial group, actually represent a mixture of northern and southern populations that merged over thousands of years of imperial expansion and cultural unification. The genetic diversity within China rivals the genetic diversity across all of Europe. Categorizing over 1 billion people as a single race ignores the massive variation hidden beneath surface-level similarities. The comparison of global DNA samples demolished every scientific argument for racial superiority or separation. It revealed that human genetic variation is continuous, not categorical. It showed that populations blend into each other without clear boundaries. It proved that the differences within any supposed racial group are larger than the average differences between music groups. Most importantly, it confirmed what anthropologists and evolutionary biologists have been saying for decades. Race is a social construct, not a biological reality. The categories we created to divide humanity do not align with the actual patterns in our DNA. We invented race to justify social hierarchies, and then convince ourselves those hierarchies reflected natural biological divisions. The genetic data proves they never did. This does not mean that racism does not have real effects. Social categories based on race have shaped access to resources, opportunities, and power for centuries. The lived experiences of people categorized into different racial groups are vastly different, even if the genetic basis for those categories is non-existent. Understanding that race is not genetic does not erase the very real social and economic music consequences of racism. But it does mean we cannot hide behind claims of natural differences or biological destiny. There is no genetic explanation for why some groups have power and others do not. There is no DNA-based reason why resources should be distributed unequally. The disparities we see in wealth, health, education, and opportunity are products of historical and ongoing social systems, not inevitable results of genetic differences between populations. The scientists who compared DNA from every corner of Earth gave us a tool to dismantle centuries of pseudoscientific racism. They proved that beneath our superficial differences, we are far more alike than we are different. They showed that human diversity is a beautiful spectrum of adaptation and variation, not a hierarchy of better and worse. They confirmed that we are all part of one human family with shared ancestry and a common future. The results did not just shock everyone. They changed everything we thought we knew about what it means to be human, and they gave us the evidence we needed to finally move past the destructive fiction of biological race.